Hello and welcome to this evening's conversation. Most of us know Jake Tapper as the CNN anchor, but tonight he's with us as an artist. His compelling book, The Outpost, an untold story of American valor, is a factual account of one of the deadliest battles America had in Afghanistan. And now this heartbreaking book has been turned into a compelling feature film, a beautiful work of art. We know that the arts gives us an opportunity to amplify facts, to dig a little deeper in our souls, and to generate the kind of empathy that allows us to understand and appreciate each other more fully in this world. And this film does this in such a compelling way. So tonight we are also very grateful to be co-hosting this event with the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center, a wonderful collection of journalists, scholars, and thinkers who can illuminate the ideas and the content of Jake's extraordinary work. And so now, to share a little bit of news about some of the work that Rocky's doing, its new director, Jason Barabbas.
Thank you very much, Mary Lou. On behalf of the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center for Public Policy and Social Sciences, and as a 1993 graduate of Dartmouth College, it is a pleasure to welcome Jake Tapper, who was a 1991 graduate of Dartmouth. It's also an honor to work with the Hopkins Center on this event tonight. Jake's book, and now the film, is important from an artistic standpoint, but it also conveys important lessons about public policy, about conflict in Afghanistan, all through rich testimonials and stories of American heroism and valor. Jake is going to be joining us later this year for an election event on October 28th with students and faculty, and we look forward to working with him on that event as well as many others in the future. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for the event tonight. Alexis Jetter is a journalist and professor in English and creative writing. With that, please take it away, Alexis.
Okay, hi. Thanks to everyone for allowing me to host this event, which is an honor and probably a danger. I just want to welcome Jake Tapper. Welcome back to Dartmouth, Jake.
It's great to be back. I wish I were actually, of course, in Hanover, New Hampshire, and not in my basement, but I'll take what I can get during this pandemic.
Okay, so we are here really to talk about your book, which came out in 2012, which is the basis for this very powerful new film of the same name, The Outpost. And which has just been released, and we're going to see a trailer from it in just a little bit. But I would be remiss to not start instead with what's happened in DC yesterday and today, where on two separate occasions, President Trump has said if he loses the November election, he may not step down. So it's a rare opportunity to have you right here to talk with. And so I have to ask you, what's going on and what's your insight into it?
Well, your paraphrase is not how he would say it. He would say that, and the White House is saying that if it's a fair and free election, he will accept the results. But I agree that his equivocation as to whether or not he would accept the results, and of course, the months of setting the stage for him not to accept the results, not just in his rhetoric, but also in the legal actions of the Trump campaign. For instance, they're in Pennsylvania right now, trying to take action against that state's mail-in ballot program, which is actually not really all that different from Florida's mail-in ballot program, which is if you request a ballot, you don't need an excuse to vote by mail, which is what they have in Florida and what they have in Pennsylvania. The difference is, of course, that President Trump is encouraging it in Florida, where he thinks it will help him, and suing to stop it in Pennsylvania, where he thinks it will not, because according to statistics, more than 70% of the people who have requested mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania are Democrats. So it's a legitimate question, and it's not just conspiracy theorists or paranoid bedwetting Democrats. It is people who are concerned about democracy, people throughout the administration, to the degree to which that a number of Republicans who are loath to even acknowledge that President Trump has said something controversial, who usually say things like, I didn't see the tweet, or I hadn't heard that remark, when reporters asked them in the hall, that there was not only a number of statements from people such as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Conference Chair of the House, Conference Chair of the Minority in the House, Liz Cheney of Wyoming, but a unanimous resolution in the Senate saying that there will be a peaceful transfer of power. Look, the basic assessment I have is that it's concerning. Period. I mean, it's not crazy for a politician to say, "We'll see what the results are, and then I'll make my decision accordingly." But given the fact that the president has been attacking mail-in ballots, which have been part of our democracy since the Civil War, literally, that he is painting inaccurately the 9 states in the District of Columbia that have universal mail-in ballots, which means ballots are being sent to everybody who's a registered voter, whether or not they ask for it. He's conflating that with the 41 states that are not doing that, but many of them are doing vote by mail if you request it. The fact that of the 9 states, I believe 4 or 5 of them have had vote by mail for quite some time, including Utah, and Washington State and Oregon, where there are Republican secretaries of state, and Nevada is new, but that state also has a Republican secretary of state. It seems clear that the president is trying to undermine the results of the elections before they happen. He did this in 2016 too, right. But he wasn't president then. Right. Then, as now, he is saying if he doesn't win, then it's not a legitimate election, and that is an anti-democratic position. There is, if there are allegations of fraud, if there are allegations of abuse or clerical error, then all of those should be investigated to the full extent that they should be investigated. But the idea that mail-in voting inherently makes the election invalid is not true, and it's un-American.
Okay, well, I would love to delve deeper into this, but we have to get to the trailer, which is just a snippet of what I have to say is a very, very powerful film. Just enormously powerful. I mean, the book is its own creature, and there's a lot more I have to say in the book, and I love the book.
Thank you.
The movie's fabulous, and let's move to the trailer right now, and then we'll get back to some questions about the book and the film.
Great.
Do you remember what happened?
When?
During the battle.
Welcome to the dark side of the moon, gentlemen.
Aren't we supposed to be on top of the mountain to win this thing?
Our job is to separate the Taliban from the ordinary people. How do we do our jobs and stay safe? Respect keeps us safe.
I wouldn't trade this for anything. Look at us, band of brothers.
Keep me in your prayers, okay?
Trust me, babe, I quit.
I love you.
We're gonna win by getting their hearts and minds.
We want their hearts and minds, and they want our blood and guts.
Sorry, pal, but that's life at Camp Keating. Every time they take a pot shot at us, they're figuring us out. When the big one comes, they'll have us dialed in.
The Taliban's not here! Harvey's not coming!
It's the big one. Saddle up! Everybody fall back. Enemy in the wire.
I'll hang back and provide cover. We need to retake this camp.
We don't have any air support, the manpower.
Our men are trapped up there. Our ammo depot is 40 yards away. There's everything we need to stay in this fight. Let me do this, sir.
Let's show them some love with the 120s.
You all right, mate? Come on, put your arms around me. You're not gonna die, okay?
RPG! Red platoon!
We're taking this bitch back.
Okay, very powerful trailer, but I have to say the whole film really packs a punch. It's interesting, Jake. I've been looking at the reviews of your book. I haven't seen the reviews of the film yet. It's COVID, so it's a little bit of a rocky rollout, I'm sure, for you. But what strikes me about the reviews of the book is that you have accolades from across the political spectrum. I mean, when you get accolades from Breitbart and Foreign Policy and, a lot of more sort of left journals, Foreign Policy isn't a left journal, I think that's pretty remarkable. And I think that's a tribute to your reporting and to your writing and to your development of characters. But I think it's also, worth talking about a little bit because the words, heroicism and this idea of the innocence, essentially, of the American effort in Afghanistan is tricky, right? And I found myself reading the book and saying yes, and then saying, whoa, 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 I'm not there. The film has a whole different thing because it's a movie and it's a little bit different, but there is that same strength of the character development, I think. And in reading it and watching the film, I was reminded of Ernie Pyle. I'm sure you're familiar with his work. He's a very famous World War II reporter who spent all of his time in the trenches with the grunts, the dirty GIs, the boys who didn't want to brush their teeth. And I wanted to ask this about you too. He goes from, if you look at the progression of Ernie Pyle with the troops, he's pretty gung-ho at the beginning of the war, very gung-ho. And then gradually, as he stays longer and longer with the troops, he ultimately becomes very disheartened with war and ultimately starts talking about the obscenity of death and dies from a sniper's bullet. But by that point, he's anti-war. And I wanted to just ask you about your whole development. You reported this story. I know it sort of came in chunks. Anyway, I just want to leave it to you to answer any part of that you want to tackle.
It's such a complicated question because obviously, the people that attacked the United States on 9/11 were in Afghanistan at the time. Right. And obviously President Bush gave the Taliban government, such as it was in terms of being a government, which was they're a horrible bunch of people. I mean, the Taliban, they are religious zealots and they, sexism is not the word for what they do. I mean, they oppress women. They do not think women should be educated. Girls should be educated. They execute. It's very. I don't want to use the word primitive because I'm not supposed to use that word, I guess, in this day and age. But it is a very anachronistic view of how humans should treat each other. So I'm not. I wasn't theoretically opposed to the war in Afghanistan. I think that there are legitimate questions to be asked about how this war has been waged. And I think that the way that we who do not serve, I do not serve, I've never served. The way that the 99% of us who don't serve and who don't sacrifice glibly send people off to battle is something that we need to think about. And the experience of writing this book, which I've said before, has been the most meaningful journalistic experience of my life. And one of the most meaningful experiences of my life, period, has made me really think about the way in which we talk about going to war and what is worth sending someone to war and that sort of thing, especially with an all-volunteer force where so little of us have any skin in the game. I can't say that this has, the experience of writing this book has made me conclude that we should never go to war or that we should never send in ground troops. But I do think, when I talk to generals, whether it's Colin Powell or anyone else, and they talk about how war has to be the absolutely last measure, the last step. Everything else has to be exhausted. I think that and by the way, I mean, the people who are generally the most anti-war in any administration are the people who have fought on them.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, I just think it's brought attention to the fact that I think the United States, and I'm only speaking for the US because, I mean, it's probably not any different in the UK or Canada or whatever, but I can only speak for the US. I think we send people off to die for us too glibly, period. And I think it's very easy for people who haven't served. That's you're looking at a picture of Scott Eastwood playing Clint Romeshay, a very real hero who was awarded the Medal of Honor in 2013. These people, even the people who come back, 8 Americans died in the Battle of Cop Keating in October 2009. But even the guys who came back are damaged to one degree or another, and as some forever, some short term. But families break up, relationships are not the same. I know of somebody, a veteran, who I came in contact with while writing this book, who attempted suicide this week. And I just think that we don't think about it enough. That's all. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't ever send troops, because obviously I think that there are times we should, but we don't think about the results enough. And this is something for policymakers in the U.S., we don't do enough when they come back. We don't do enough to help them. Period.
Okay. Yeah. Right. My other question really is looking at a more journalistic question. And, in reading your book, which of course came out in 2012, and in watching the film, which was released just this year.
Yeah.
And by the way, you can watch it at the Hop on demand, everyone who's listening, for free, just starting today and through next Wednesday. So.
Oh, nice. And it'll be on Netflix in October for anybody who's not at Dartmouth. It's on video on demand right now. I think you can watch it on Amazon Prime, obviously on demand at the Hop for a few days, and then it'll be on Netflix in October.
And I really highly recommend it. It's really a very powerful film. And if we had a lot of time, I would ask you about your input to the film and, the sort of transition from the book to the film. But I actually want to ask you a different question. During the beginning and the height of the Iraq War, and also the war in Afghanistan, it was not only considered unpatriotic, journalists to report on the some of the carnage of the war, and it was considered, or even just how it was being, how the war was being run, from the top brass on down. And Fox News made it very clear that reporters, not just at Fox, but at any network that was reporting, not even negatively, but just was really presenting some of the carnage you talk about, you write about it as shown in the film, that was not allowed to be shown by and large. And the public probably didn't want to see it. And you write about this in the book, that the media, probably not for the better, chose not to push that. And, we could talk a lot more about the war in Vietnam and things like that. But I'm really taken by the idea that you've written a book. You wrote it in 2012 that was very critical in terms of how the war was being, there's another word for it, but, run from top down. And of course, this film, raises a lot of the same issues. What changed? What changed between, the height of the war to 2012? Why is it now? I mean, it's not like people are very, anti-violent. We have more people armed in this country than ever before. There's paramilitaries running around doing all kinds of stuff. But this idea of foreign adventurism, it's really changed. And Trump, has said, let's bring the troops home. What's changed as a journalist? What do you see over the last, 10 years?
Well, I think first of all that it's very clear, and it's certainly Fox was part of the problem, but I don't think it's fair to only blame Fox.
No, I don't.
I think there was I'm not here to defend them, but I was at ABC News. It started from 2003 to 2012,
right?
And just from the inside out, there was a degree of, it wasn't just the media; it was just society, and the reaction of how dare you question XYZ? How dare you? And I remember David Weston was the president of ABC News for a time when I was there. And one time he talked I think he was just speaking extemporaneously, and he talked about how theoretically you could argue that the Pentagon was a legitimate target as opposed to the Twin Towers. This is not me. I'm not saying this, but
I get it. Yeah.
I mean, that caused untold controversy for him. And I don't agree with it, but the idea that even discussions of this sort of thing
right.
were off the table. I remember, the question of whether journalists should be wearing American flag pins was a big discussion at the time. And, the truth of the matter is that I think a lot of journalists look back at that time with a sense of shame. There are certainly exceptions. There's a team at McClatchy,
right,
did a lot of excellent journalism questioning the intelligence about whether or not Iraq actually had weapons of mass destruction. But there was a fever that it's hard to explain to younger people, but there was a fever after 9/11 that any questioning of the government, not just about Iraq, but just about anything, was perceived as unpatriotic. About the NSA wiretap program, anything. And that was an abdication. The journalists who allowed themselves to be bullied into that were abdicating our responsibilities. And I think that's shameful. We're not here to be popular. We're here to challenge people in power. And you know what? At the time, guess what? The Democrats were not doing that.
Right.
Some were, but many were not. And ultimately, I remember when I was the ABC News congressional correspondent, going back and asking everybody who had voted to go to war in Iraq if they regretted their vote. And ultimately, they did. Most of them did. I'd have to go back and look at the story, but like we literally called every single one, including alumnus Peter Fitzgerald from Illinois, who was a senator at the time, a Republican senator. But we called all of them, and they all regretted it. Not all of them, but a majority regretted it. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and the media can't expect politicians to be courageous. We need to be courageous. We need to ask the questions. So I think that's a lesson that I look back when I think of about that time.
Yeah, I think it's really worth looking back at that time. It's a sobering reflection on what happens when journalists think that, well, we don't have cover from the Democratic Party. How can we go out? And it raises issues, of course, about, did the media lose the Vietnam War? This whole, and that's another conversation to have another time. But clearly, the truth is that in Vietnam, the journalists didn't want to get out too far ahead of public opinion. And they were looking, particularly their editors, were looking over their shoulders. And the media didn't really turn against the war until the public turned against the war.
Yeah, and there's this mythology that Walter Cronkite, I revere.
Yeah.
But mythology that he somehow led the charge when he questioned whether or not it was a quagmire. And he didn't.
No.
He didn't lead the charge. And here's the thing, and this is the thing. To question whether or not we are sending these men and women who volunteer to put themselves in harm's way, if our leaders choose to send them because they think it's that important, to question whether or not that duty is worthy of their sacrifice, that mission is the most pro-troops thing you can do. It is the most patriotic thing you can do, because you are actually doing something that entails a risk to you as a journalist. And you are actually doing something, and you're actually risking something in terms of your reputation or whatever, to ask about these lives that will be lost. So that's not to say that we should oppose these missions or oppose war, but is to say we should be asking very, very tough questions before our leaders glibly send people to war. Who was the last president we had that served? I think it was George H.W. Bush. That's probably before a lot of the people watching right now were even born.
Yeah.
Right. So he was the last president, I believe, that served, actually himself, put himself in harm's way to protect this country. So there are a lot of people in government who haven't done that. And even those who have, that doesn't give them like a blank check to do whatever they want to do. We need to ask those questions. And it is pro-troops. It is pro-troops to ask those questions.
Okay, I'm getting signaled that it's time to move this to students' questions. So I want to bring in Brad and Elizabeth. And by the way, I really appreciate your clarity and passion on this, Jake. I think it's so important for people to hear. Okay, so we'll start with Brad, and let's see. Yeah, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Thanks, Jake, for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm Brad Carney. I'm 20 at Dartmouth, and I study philosophy. I also happen to be an Army veteran. And so the question I had for you is, when you were reporting on the war before you went to Afghanistan, and then you also reported on the war after, what were some of the misconceptions that you had about war? And then also, what was life for you like? You know, you've been reporting on the war and then going to Afghanistan, being embedded at a forward operating base. What was that like for you?
First of all, for people who don't know, Brad served in the Army and was in Ramadi in addition to other tough spots of the world. So thank you, Brad. I mean, I think one of the weirdest things about being in a forward operating base, and I went to forward operating base Bostic. I couldn't get to Combat Outpost Keating because it didn't exist anymore. The attack on Cop Keating was October 3rd, 2009. By the end of the week, the U.S. had abandoned it and blown it up. So by the time I went to Afghanistan in 2011, I went twice. Once with Obama, which I didn't get to see anything except for Bagram, and then once I went and I was embedded in 2011, and I got as close as the next forward operating base. I asked if I could get to Cop Keating, and a guy, Matt Shackman, a captain there, said, "Well, we could go there. I don't know if we get back." He said, "In Afghanistan, you can go anywhere. The question is not whether you go there. The question is whether you can get back." So I think one of the things that was so crazy to experience is, first of all, the disconnect between the beauty of that part of Afghanistan, which is just the northeast Afghanistan with it's at the base of the Hindu Kush Mountains. It's just one of the most beautiful spots in the world. The disconnect between that and the danger, and then the randomness of the violence, I think, is one of the things that's so odd, because you're in a base, and you could be wearing a helmet and a vest and all that, or not, and the random, just I think when I was there, I think I was with the Wolfhounds 227 infantry when I was embedded. And they'd lost about eight men that year, that rotation. And it wasn't all just like predictable. It wasn't like because they went to confront the Taliban and got in a shootout. It was, no, they were driving and an IED went off. Or, this guy was just picked off by a sniper. Just completely random. And I knew that intellectually from reading war coverage and then from writing the book. But I think just when you're standing in a place and somebody's like points to a bullet in the wall, and like you realize it a little bit more tangibly than when you read about it or hear about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's perfect answer. No, thank you so much, Jake. Elizabeth?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you, Jake. I'm Elizabeth. I am from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm a 21 studying history and film and media studies. I'm also the news executive editor at The D right now, of which you were a wonderful cartoonist back in the day. You're definitely very welcome to come back and chat with us anytime. We would love that. We love our alumni. Yeah, so my question for you.
That's a comment that making fun of the president of the college at the time, James Friedman, may he rest in peace. And there was this impression that he was a Harvard guy, not a Dartmouth guy, and that he didn't really get it. So this was making fun of him. Actually, I think the first cartoon I ever did for the Daily D made fun of Joe Biden, which gives you an idea of how long he's been around. But anyway, keep going. I'm sorry.
Right. No, I remember seeing that Biden cartoon. Yeah, my question for you, as both an aspiring journalist and also a film student, I'm interested to hear your views on the success of translating the very extensive reporting you did in your book into the parameters of an action film. So what would you say are the benefits and the drawbacks of both mediums, writing and film, in telling this story?
That's a great question. So the book is, it's a long book, and it's basically 3 different books. And the character arc is really about the base itself, the outpost itself, from the beginning and why they set it up, to the successes of the base in 2007, 2008, to everything going to hell in 2008, 2009. And the character arc is kind of just like the story of the outpost. The movie just basically takes the story of the last troop, the last company of guys that were stationed there in 2009, 361 Cav. And it doesn't go into 371 Cav, 191 Cav, 64 Cav, the other 3 units, although in order to honor their memories and also to tell the larger truth of the outpost, Rod Lurie, the director, who did an amazing job with this film, included the story of Ben Keating from 2006 and including the story of Rob Yeskis from 2008, as if they served with the guys from 2009. So I guess the first thing to say is that for a journalist, it's difficult to wrap your head around the idea of adjusting facts to meet the narrative of a film based on a true story, because it's not a documentary. It's not, it's not 100% true. It's based on a true story. And it does a pretty good job. I mean, there's a great website that I was a huge fan of before this movie called History versus Hollywood, which looks at movies made about actual events and susses out what's real, what's not real, and how good a job the film did. And they gave us a very good rating in terms of how much it stuck to the truth of what happened. Although, they did note that there were some liberties taken in terms of conflating stories. But I mean, that's the difficulty, is that when you're in nonfiction, which is my job, 24/7, you don't take those liberties. You don't conflate. You explain everything and explain all the nuance and such. But in a film like this, you have to take some liberties. Now, we did so, Rod Lurie and the team and me, reaching out to the family of Ben Keating, reaching out to the family of Rob Yeskis, letting, I'm part of a private Facebook group of veterans and Gold Star families and Blue Star families, people who are part of the Cobb Keating family. And there was communication about this. And it was a controversial announcement when I said, I think we're going to do this. I think we're going to bring guys in. I think we're going to tell this story and this story, even though they didn't take place in 2009. And people objected to it. And we just tried to explain, we're trying to honor these 2 other guys and also tell the larger story. But it's an adjustment to go from the world of nonfiction to the world of fictionalized or, a film version. That's me, by the way, on the set of, we're in Bulgaria there. That's Yoni Younger on the left. He's one of the producers. He also played John Hill. That's Rod Lurie, the director and a West Point grad. He did an amazing job with the film. That's me, and I think that's my wife taking my picture. We took the kids to Bulgaria to look at the filming of the film. Which was an incredible experience. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's super cool. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think we're going to move now to Devin and Momina. Momina seems to be having some connection problems, and so Devin might be asking her question for her. Is that right? Momina's in Pakistan, is my understanding.
There she is. Yay.
Okay, well, maybe Momina, you can ask your own question. Can you? Can we hear you? Why don't you say something? Yeah.
I think you're muted.
Hi.
There she is.
I've unmuted myself. Yeah. Hi. Hi everyone. I'm Momina and I'm a 24 at Dartmouth. Thank you. Are you guys able to hear me? I'm sorry.
Yep, all good.
A little spotty. Okay.
All good. Ask the question.
Yeah, sure. So as a writer and as a journalist, because that is also something I am and currently aspiring to be, how do you insert your perspective but remain objective in doing so? I'd also like to reference Elsbecker's question, who's also a 24, so a classmate, and sharing unshaded facts with important opinions during broadcasts. And at what point do you prioritize straight truths versus opinions?
Okay.
Okay, those are great questions. So if the first one got a little blurred because of the connection, but you're asking about, can you repeat the first question? The second question I got, which has to do with broadcasting and what's opinion and what's fact. What was the first one?
Sure. Yeah. Can you hear me now? Just make
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question was, as a writer and a journalist, how do you insert your perspective but still remain objective? Because there obviously is a difference between writing and filmmaking and then reporting, despite the very similarities that exist between all the three. So how do you insert your perspective but still manage to remain objective in the process?
So here's the thing, and there's a difference between. It is the job of a journalist to search for the truth. And the truth isn't partisan, and the truth isn't necessarily ideological, but it's the job of a journalist to search for the truth. What happened? Now, let's take the Supreme Court battle going on right now. I happen to think that what is going on right now in the Supreme Court battle would be going on if Jeb Bush were president. I don't think it's any different. I don't think this is anything that is Trump specific. I think this is more McConnell specific than Trump specific. And there isn't an empirically correct position, in my view, about this Supreme Court fight. This is a fight between ideologies and parties. And my job is to ask questions of the people who are players in this, get them to answer them, provide those facts to the public, provide the history of this to the public and all the context, and let them make up their mind. I do not think it is my job to oppose a Supreme Court justice. My job is to present the story of what is going on. But different people have different opinions about how to do this. I mean, I consider myself a non-ideological journalist. I think that probably there are people at Fox and people at MSNBC who don't view it that way, who view their position as to be ideological, and that's okay, I think. As long as they're sticking to facts and trying to be fair. There are positions. It's kind of the same question you asked that your friend asked, and that is the concept of when is my opinion relevant? And the truth of the matter is, I think seldom. But I do think that there are two areas where journalists should take stands One of them is about truth and facts. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So, for instance, I remember that interview that screen grabs from. We were, Donald Trump this was in response. Part of what had just happened was President Trump had just said that CNN never covered terrorism. Well, that's just a lie. That's just a blatant falsehood. There's no two sides on that. That's just not true. So that's one. I think it's our job, journalists' jobs, to stand up for what's true and what's fair in that respect. And then the other thing, and unfortunately this is more and more the case, is decency, just basic human decency. And that means standing against bigotry. It means standing against smears, false smears against people. And it's a phenomenon of this era that we've become so numb to Donald Trump retweeting somebody calling Joe Biden a pedophile, which happened a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
That we don't even mention it or note it, but it's obscene. It's an obscenity. It's a lie, and it's disgusting. And one of the things that President Trump has succeeded in doing by telling so many lies, in saying so many things that are indecent, telling 4 congresswomen of color to go back where they came from, even though 3 of them are from here. Yeah. And the 4th came here and is an American citizen. She came here when she was 12 as a refugee of war. But that's just, he's making the very concept of truth and decency partisan. And that's regrettable. But that doesn't mean that we are supposed to bend to that, and I will not.
I want to bring Devin in here, but I want to just say, because I have the ability, I think you're selling yourself a little short, Jake. I mean, in addition to the Kellyanne Conway interview, which was amazing, I'll never forget when Stephen Miller was sitting opposite you in the studio, and you just got to a point where you just said, leave. We're just cutting you out. And because, I'd like for you just to reflect on that, because I think you've been more assertive about calling lies lies and just not standing for it. It was an amazing moment, I think, when you basically kicked Stephen Miller out of the studio. Talk about that a little bit.
I invite people from the Trump White House and the Trump campaign and the Trump administration on my show, and I invite Trump supporters on the show, and people can have differing opinions and people can defend positions, policy positions. And the truth of the matter is, I think that there are plenty of legitimate arguments that President Trump could make about the economy or about trade deals. I certainly think he has a point to make when he says that trade deals were previously negotiated too often with Wall Street and corporate America in mind and not the middle class. But I'm not going to sit there and listen to lies and have CNN be attacked. It's just a waste of time for viewers. And the truth of the matter is, this is quaint, but I could point to a number of very tough interviews I did during the Obama years when I was getting all sorts of tweets about what a right-wing neocon zealot I was. The job is to challenge people in power. And, I spent 8 years being attacked as a right-wing hack, and now I'm getting whatever I'm getting, and that's just the job. And, if Joe Biden wins, and who knows what's going to happen, but if Joe Biden wins, I don't doubt it's going to go back. And, a lot of people are going to say, what happened to Jake Tapper? And the truth is nothing.
Yeah.
Will happen to me.
Or he's still in the basement, Give him a break.
Hopefully by then I'll be out of my basement, but we'll see.
Let him out. Devin, let's move to you. And I'm sorry for taking up some of your time, Devin. Go ahead.
No worries. Hi, Jake. I'm Devin Kurtz. I'm a senior at Dartmouth. While at Dartmouth, I studied ancient Greek history, ancient Greek history and language. And I wanted to ask you about a tension that has existed in war since antiquity. When soldiers die in battle, we say that they died for our country. But many soldiers, such as those at Cop Keating, will say that when the bullets start flying, they're fighting more to protect their comrades next to them than to advance America's grand strategy. How did you think about that difference, and how did it influence the way you told this war story?
Devin, very brilliant. Thank you. I think the point is that they're there for their country, but they die and they fight for each other. And it's taken me a little while to kind of understand this, but they enlist because, well, there are 2.5 million people in the armed services right now. They enlist for all sorts of reasons. Some of them, a judge gave them a choice. You can go into the army or I'm going to send you to jail. I mean, some of them, were born for that. They come from 5 generations of service members. I mean, there are any number of reasons, but generally speaking, a lot of them enlist because they feel like it's a patriotic thing to do. The United States is the best country in the world. The United States stands for a number of values that I believe in terms of democracy, in terms of freedom, in terms of liberty. We try to be a good force. God knows sometimes we fail, but we try to be a good force in the world. But I think that, and this is a struggle, especially for somebody like me who never served. I think that the point of why they fight, being for their brothers and sisters, is an insightful one, as you know. All 8 of the guys who died at Combat Outpost Keating that day, every one of them died either trying to defend the base and their brothers or trying to help their brothers defend the base. Every single one of them. Kevin Thompson runs out in the mortar pits to fire back. He's killed. Josh Kirk does the same at the front of the camp. He's killed. Michael Scusa runs out to supply ammunition for guys that are stuck out there, and he's killed. There's a guy, Brad Larson, who's stuck in a truck, and he needs more ammunition. He's firing back. He's out of ammunition, and Vernon Martin and Stephen Mace and Justin Gallegos run there to try to provide him with ammunition. They ultimately are all killed. Gallegos trying to save Stephen Mace, and then there are 5 guys. Those 5 guys are in this Humvee, basically stuck there, and 3 other guys try to save them, and 2 of them, Josh Hart and Chris Griffin, are killed. All eight trying to save each other. And at the end of the day, and I have these conversations all the time with veterans because they wonder what their friends died for, what they fought for. And at the end of the day, that's what they were dying for and fighting for. We sent them there. The United States sent them there. The public and the government and the politicians sent them there, the generals. But they died fighting for each other. And I think I wish they were all alive. But there is nothing shameful about that act of selflessness, of trying to help somebody else. And there's a great scene in the movie where Ty Carter, played by Caleb Landry Jones, is talking about how he ultimately, and later on, he's awarded in real life the Medal of Honor for doing this, for trying to save the life of Stephen Mace. And he isn't ultimately able to do it because Mace loses so much blood. And there's more about this in the book than in the movie. But in the movie, a shrink, a woman named Katie Kopp, who's a real person, is asking him, like, he's talking about how he couldn't even save Mace, and she said he was your friend. And Ty Carter says no, because they weren't friends. They weren't. They didn't get along, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter. And there is something incredibly noble and beautiful, and obviously sad and tragic about that.
I want to interject and just say, I think we will finally learn something really important when we read a book about, you know, the other side and how they try to save each other's lives and how they were sent to war and how they ended up fighting for each other and dying for each other. I think if we come full circle there and look at the reality of war from the bottom up on not just both sides, there's so many sides in Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq, I think then we might actually come to something. And I trust, Jake, that you've given that some thought. I want everyone to think about that. I want to think about that. Okay, so I want to bring in Amanda and Kate, who will be asking questions from the public on the YouTube chat. So hi, Kate. Hi, Amanda. Take it away.
Hi, Jake. My name is Kate, and I'm a junior at Dartmouth studying math and theater, and I work at the Rockefeller Center, the co-sponsor for tonight's event. We are so thrilled to have you with us, Jake, and we'll go ahead and start with some of the questions from the YouTube viewers. So from Brian Mattamore, we have, in what ways was writing this book such an important or life-changing experience for you?
Well, I mean, it just was so out of my comfort zone. I'd been covering politics for so long. And at that point, in 2009, I had worked my way to, I was ABC News chief White House correspondent covering the Obama administration. And I had done a tour in in Iraq for ABC News. And I had covered war to a degree, but I had never really understood it the way that I came to understand it, just in terms of what does it actually mean. And it just was a profound experience to talk to literally dozens and dozens of people who served and sacrificed and people who lost loved ones in war, and to really experience it on that level. So it's not just a picture and a name of somebody who died, but their story. Why did they enlist? Why were they there? Who did they leave behind? I'm thinking about right now, just occurred to me, a guy named Pat Liebert, who was killed in this operation before on their way to set up Combat Outpost Keating. And I think about, he had a brother, Noah, and Noah's special needs. And when Pat Liebert's mom, Pat Liebert was going to take care of Noah when his mom died. But Pat died before his mom. And it's just that, just that kind of, like, I'm Facebook friends with a lot of these people. So I still see Liebert's mom, and she posts pictures of Noah and all that. And it's just to see this on just a very human level, about to see these people's kids grow up, and they don't get to see those kids grow up, and I do, and it just humbles you, and it just it makes you just see the costs of war in a way that I just never got before, from just reading about it and from a fairly superficial coverage that I had done before that.
Yeah. Wow, thank you, Jake, and we'll pass along to Amanda for the next question.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, Jake. My name is Amanda. I am 22, and I study sociology and public policy, and I also work in the Rockefeller Center, just like Kate. And the question I have here is from Veronica. She asks, how does the fake news rhetoric impact your ability to reach people on both sides of the aisle, and how would that impact the election, if at all?
So fake news was actually like a real thing. It was a term that was used for the fake news, the actual disinformation put out there by bad actors, some of them from abroad, Russia or whatever, fake stories, some of which have now evolved into the QAnon conspiracy theory and that sort of nonsense. But that's what it was. And it was actually an important concept. But President Trump took it and turned it into, quite literally, any story he didn't like, true or not. And what the president has been doing has been to undermine the credibility of any check on him, whether judicial or politicians or law enforcement or the media. And it's been a very effective campaign where I've seen polls now where more Republicans believe what President Trump says about the coronavirus than believe the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And I mean, that's horrifying, having nothing to do with me. I mean, why would you believe any politician before you believe a scientist on the subject of science? It doesn't make any sense. For your own health, it doesn't make any sense. But this is where we are. So I guess my answer is, I think it's sad, but it has, in terms of how it affects me, I think it's regrettable, but it's a much bigger problem than whether or not Trump fan number one believes a story I'm saying or not. It's much larger than that, because now we have the CDC and Dr. Fauci and the FDA and the judiciary and the FBI. I mean, President Trump, the FBI director, Christopher Wray, will say such and such about whatever, about Russia interfering in the election. And President Trump will say, he's wrong.
Yeah.
And his supporters will believe the president instead of the nonpartisan expert who President Trump appointed to that position. And if we become a country where there is no concept of expertise or empirical truth for a large segment of the population, then I fear what that will become. Now, there was a time during the Bush years when according to some polls, a majority of the Democratic Party voters thought that Bush knew about 9/11 ahead of time. But the Democratic Party, to its credit, if you give them credit for nothing else, really tried to chase a lot of those people out of the party, or discourage them or denounce them. Now we have QAnon, crazy conspiracy theory believers winning congressional primaries and being embraced as candidates. And it's really disturbing. And let me just also say, I've lived in Washington and covered politics now for a long time. When these norms are eroded, it's really tough to get them back. And one thing that Marco Rubio knew and said in 2016, because he wouldn't talk about the Hillary Clinton emails in 2016, because he said, I'm not going to talk about stuff that Russia is putting out there, because they're putting it out about Hillary Clinton today and they're going to put it out about somebody else tomorrow. And that was, I thought, very wise, because a Republican Party that accepts its leaders calling Democrats with no evidence just a wanton, disgusting smear, calling them pedophiles today, what do you think Democrats are going to do tomorrow? I mean, if it works, you think that politicians aren't going to just continue to sink as low as it goes? I mean, that's not how it works. It's just sad. So, I mean, there's an information problem in this country. And one of the problems is a lot of the sources of information, Fox is a good example, have lost sight of the importance of just the concept of empirical truth.
Thank you. Well, I'll pass it back over to Kate, who has a question for you.
Okay, so we have our last question for the night, and it comes from Avalon, and she says, what keeps you grounded in reality when writing about tough topics like war or covering stories that seem disheartening sometimes?
So I'm sitting here at this table, and there are all these Legos here. Maybe this looks familiar to some of you guys. Let me get a less. Here's one. So my kids, I got a 10-year-old boy who cares about video games and dancing and making us laugh. And I have a 13-year-old girl who cares about Pokemon and her friends and Girl Scouts. And I've got an amazing wife. And, this is a house full of historical items all over the house. And my study is full of items dating back to Teddy Roosevelt. I have here. I'll give you guys a little glimpse of something. And this is a little corner of the house where I have all these items related to Jackie Robinson. This is a letter that Jackie Robinson wrote to Leon Uris, who wrote Exodus, thanking him for the copy of Exodus. That's Leon Uris writing him back, thanking him. A letter that Jackie Robinson wrote to a Broadway producer, talking about how he's hanging out with Sidney Poitier, talking about how he just tried out for the role of Jim in a movie version of Huckleberry Finn. So this is a house where we focus on family, and this is a house where we're surrounded by history. And so, you know, it's this place and these people keep me grounded, and these memories of people who have been through much harder times than we're going through. Jackie Robinson integrating the Major League Baseball in 1948. Jackie Robinson, who was rather radical, if you ever read his autobiography, I Never Had It Made. He had pretty strong feelings about America and being a black man in America. And he kept his mouth shut for, which I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been. So between being surrounded by people who couldn't care less what I'm going through because they're focused on, you know, their friends, and being surrounded by memories of people who had it much harder and had much more difficult jobs, you know, I'm fine.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. And back to Amanda just for our last question of the night.
Yes, so this is the last question. It's just, do you have any advice for Dartmouth students?
Yes, I have so much advice. Oh my God, that's me on graduation day in 1991, if you can believe it. I don't know why we had those ribbons. Oh, maybe, is that a Phi Beta Kappa ribbon? I think that's why, it's a Phi Beta Kappa ribbon. So I have so much advice that I gave a whole speech about it when I was the commencement speaker in 2017. And I do recommend, if you actually care about like a longer, more, you know, with attempts at humor in it, there's a longer list of advice in there on YouTube. But the short version is, and a couple notes. One, there's a lot of rejection in the grown-up world, a lot of rejection. And there isn't when you're in high school and when you're in college. These are worlds, I mean, they're rejection, there's boys and girls and all that stuff. But I mean, like, generally speaking, you have teachers and TAs and deans and parents and people who are really focused on making sure that you feel good and that you're happy and that like your needs are being tended to. And then all of a sudden you're thrust out into the world, and other than your friends and your parents, that's not how the world is. And like, so just be prepared for that. It's okay. I got rejected 9 million times before I made it in journalism at all. And I still, there's so, like, it just never stops. It never stops. You're not good enough. This person's better. It never stops. That is part of being a grown-up. And you just have to get a thick skin about it. And that's just how it is. And it sucks, but know that that's normal. Know that it's like, that's what we all go through. Every one of us. Like all the stuff about Dr. Seuss's first book, to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, was rejected by 47 publishers. And I mean, all that stuff, it's all true. It's all true. So that's one. I'll just give you one more, which is when you apply for a job, and this is kind of a corollary of the first point of advice. Don't count on anybody giving you a job or an internship to be nice. The grown-up world doesn't operate, generally speaking, on the premise of, I'm going to do this to be nice. Niceness is wonderful, and if you find friends like that or bosses like that, my God, stick with them. That's lovely. Kindness is very important. But generally speaking, the grown-up world doesn't work like that. The adult world works in the concept of, what can this person do for me? What can this person do for me? How can this person help me with my job? And if you know that, you are ahead of the game. And that just means I will show up at 7 o'clock and leave at 10 p.m. I speak 7 languages, or I had an idea for how you could be doing this better, or whatever. Just have something, even if it's just a work ethic. I just want to come in and be part of this. I'm so excited to be part of this. I'll do anything. I'll work weekends. I'll open your mail. I'll write your thank you notes, anything. It's not for the rest of your life. It's just to get your foot in the door and then to start working your way up. But I swear to God, if somebody had told me that when I was 22, I would have, I feel like I would have been it would have been better. I'll just put it that way. It would have been better. Nobody, if you want to be a journalist, no one's gonna buy your pitch because they think you're nice. It's either a good idea that they like that hadn't occurred to them, or it isn't. So just work, and have a great attitude about it, and you will go farther than you ever thought you could.
Okay, Jake, it's been a real pleasure. And
you agree with that advice, right? I mean, don't you? No?
I think it's great advice.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I'm looking for a contemporary to back me on this. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually a little older than you.
If somebody had said that to me when I was your age, I probably wouldn't have listened to it. But I swear to God, it would have been so helpful.
Just work like a dog, guys, and
have a great attitude. I'll come. I'll do anything you want me to do. I'm so excited to be part of this.
Okay, so I'm getting cues here from the private chat to call this to a close. It's been terrific. Before we close, though, I want to remind people that the Outpost is playing at the Hop this week. Actually, it started today, and it's going to play through Wednesday, and it's on demand, so you can just plug in some information and watch it on your computers. I think Sydney's going to send up some cards. So, oh God, I'm not supposed to read that part. Sorry. It's supposed to be all like seamless. Anyway, I just want to thank you all for what I think was a really interesting and very, I don't know, just really honest discussion. And Jake, thanks for taking so much time. The questions were terrific.
Such great kids. I mean, you guys are beautiful and smart and brilliant, and you're all. I'm so proud to be associated with a school that has you guys as students. It makes me so happy.
All right, so I guess everyone needs to wave now. Is that sort of what we're gonna do here? Is like,
thanks, guys.
Okay, and
thanks for everything.
Yeah. Okay, we're done.